Welcome back to episode 63 of the Block Runner podcast. Here is where we discuss the latest developments in cryptocurrency while we make this new technology relatable to you. As always, I'm your host, William, talking with your co-host, Iman, and today we bring you a very special guest introducing Pri Desai from OpenLaw.io to talk about a new project called the LAO. Here are some of the topics we discussed today. First up, how does OpenLaw relate to the LAO? Next, how a for-profit venture creates a better blockchain community. Then, can Decentraland take the LAO mechanisms to manage a fund? And finally, how a member-directed venture capital compares to a traditional VC. All right, let's listen in. Let's get started with some questions. And
Sure.
I think one of the main questions that I have is, how does OpenLaw relate to the LAO itself?
Or open law.
OpenLaw, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
OpenLaw.
Yeah. So OpenLaw is a project that was founded in May 2017. So actually almost exactly 3 years old. But the idea with this was that we saw smart contracts, we saw blockchain as like a way to track and trace different data and track and trace different digital assets. So, those digital assets can be like ETH, Bitcoin, or they can also be like tokenized assets that represent real world things like real estate or intellectual property rights. And so you can start like thinking of this emergent token economy. And as you see that token economy flourish, you realize that a lot of those tokens, including ETH and Bitcoin, need some sort of legal wrapping paper tied to them to give them real world significance. So with that in mind, our two co-founders created OpenLaw. It's kind of it blends legal contracts and smart contracts in one uniform way. There's a concept called Ricardian contracts, which we actually really I don't know how familiar with that, but effectively we're building a Ricardian contract system. So we take legal contracts and we call them wrappers around smart contracts. So what we do is we take any legal contract, mark that up in our domain-specific markup language that we've created. That turns the contract into a dynamic data object. You can embed smart contracts in the agreement. It's also tied to the markup language as well. Both parties can review the terms of the agreement. They sign it. The smart contract gets called, and whatever payment or digital asset transfer can easily happen. And if there were a dispute to arise, you have the legal terms associated with that. So it's kind of a nice interface into the real world when you're talking about like smart contracts and blockchains all on the back end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one of the things, I think it was Iman who discovered the LAO. Iman, do you want to talk about how you discovered it and its kind of relationship to what we're doing with Decentraland?
Yeah. I discovered it just through the way I discover anything else, but I guess this is like a new endeavor for myself because this is like my first project ever. Working in Decentraland, we have our own, third application built on top of the platform. And, part of the role of working with like a decentralized community is figuring out how the whole governance layer is going to work out. And so we're like in the infant stages of that as a community. There's a lot of people who don't even understand that that's actually part of the project. You know what I mean?
True.
Figuring out how the DAO works and how the governance, how the decision-making is going to occur. So naturally, I started doing my research, and then the LAO came up almost like a godsend. I wasn't, I didn't actively go look for it. You know how Twitter works, is things just like show up.
Yeah.
and it was like destiny. I had like a vision in my own mind of how I want the DAO to function on a personal level, but the community discussions are just now beginning. So I found your articles about what the LAO is and how it's a decentralized autonomous organization, but with profit in mind. And I figured that's perfect for what we need for Decentraland, because we have a DAO fund that's allocated over like a 10-year span. It's all locked into a smart contract. But if we just kind of pass out this money without any kind of guidelines or framework of sustainability.
If the 10-year time span for Decentraland, they have roughly 222 million mana in the DAO, and we're supposed to decide how we kind of manage the 220 million, right? And if we decide to just grant that money to a bunch of developers, it's not sustainable in our eyes. And so when Iman brought up the LAO, I was like, well, this is it. This is the mechanism that the Decentraland community can use to provide funds beyond those 10 years.
And yeah, it's all about like, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say that I guess one of the questions is, so the LAO, it's essentially, it boils down to smart contracts, and then we just implement those smart contracts into the Decentraland DAO. Then we can just leverage the functionality of the current funds, and I don't know, I guess invest those funds in a bunch of developers, a bunch of projects, to I guess expect a return. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, grants are great, and we see that a lot with like foundations and others, and I think it's a great approach. But when you're thinking about building community, which I think really blockchain, it's like critically important to have community and like align incentives appropriately. And I think having a for-profit structure really does align those incentives a little bit better. If you have a community that can actually reap some sort of benefit from the grants that they're giving, obviously they're be more invested in the future of the organization, and the projects themselves are also going to have, more of a desire to perform as well. So it's kind of a win-win scenario. So yeah, the way I realized I spoke a little bit about OpenLaw and how that relates to the LAO, I didn't really touch on that. But so OpenLaw, we released like a DAO vertical back over the summer, basically creating like limited liability wrappers for DAOs to spin up pretty easily. We got a lot of positive feedback on that and realized, well, we have the legal acumen and the tools to create a more full-fledged DAO, so why don't we do that? So thereafter, in the fall, we announced that we were going to do the LAO, so a limited liability org where people, to your point, can fund ETH in this LAO, and then projects can apply to the LAO for funding. The members can then nominate project proposals that they like. The members can then review it. They can hop on calls with the founder. They can do whatever they need, due diligence they need to really get a sense of the project and go through some of the decks and other materials. If they all approve the smart contracts on the back end, once they approve it, we'll pay out the project immediately. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Moloch DAO, but we extended those Moloch DAO smart contracts, forked them, and made them for profit.
Can you explain? Can you explain the Moloch DAO?
Yeah, so the Moloch DAO is interesting. They started out with grant giving smart contracts. It was created by Amin Salamani. Mm-hmm. When was that? I want to say it was May of last year. He announced it, and I think the idea really was to revive this idea of a DAO in general. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the 2016 mm-hmm. DAO. I feel like most people in Ethereum are at this point, but I think there was a lot of like PTS DAO around that. I think the concept and the idea of a DAO or decentralized organization is really a killer app on Ethereum, but I think there was a little bit of a hangover that stuck around, and I think Amin saw that, wanted to bring that back to life, and that's really what he's doing. So a lot of other folks have extended the Moloch DAO smart contracts. So you have folks like Metacartel and others that are really using it, and we sort of see that, and we've noted this before, as almost like the ERC-20 standard for creating orgs on Ethereum. Mm-hmm. So really great work that he's doing, and we've worked closely with him, and I think he's probably going to participate to some extent in the LAO as well. So
what gave the initial idea to create these limited liability corporations for on smart contracts? Like, what was the inspiration behind that?
I mean, really the DAO. I think that was the idea, and in the U.S. we have pretty friendly limited liability laws, so this is a U.S.-based entity. You don't need a general partner in the U.S. You can have a completely member-managed mm-hmm. Fund, which is a little bit different than what you see in Europe and others. So we saw this opportunity to really bring that vision to life in a legally enforceable way. So if we can like really take that vision, kind of start small. So this is an analogy that we write a lot about and that I really like, but I think Coinbase is a great and apt example, but Coinbase saw the Mt. Gox model, saw that there was an opportunity for exchanges, saw that there was a clear market fit and demand for a crypto exchange, took those learnings and decided to start small with Bitcoin, really edge their way in, work with regulators, try to do everything above board. We similarly are doing that. So we took that model. We're trying to more or less take the vision of the DAO and make that legal and all above board, do the accredited investor checks for members who want to join, make sure everything just looks really tight and clean and is all legal. And so once we really can nail that piece, we can start thinking a little bit more creatively on where we can take this. So, we're thinking about possible protocol DAOs, we're thinking about, an insurance DAO, something of that nature. So the world really opens up, but this is like a really great place to start.
No, absolutely. I think Decentraland could really use this in our opinion because of that sustainability thing. And what I wanted to understand a little bit more was the investors into this LAO. So there still have to be accredited investors, correct? Mm-hmm. And if you're not an accredited investor, I guess you would have to be outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you still have to be accredited, but yeah, no, there's different standards involved with that.
Oh, okay. So if you're not in the U.S., you still have to be an accredited investor. Does the definition change? Like, what's an accredited investor? Is it still $1 million net worth? Or...
Yeah. So the definition hasn't shifted. Here, let me. I don't have it fully memorized.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think from what I remember,
net worth of a certain kind.
Yeah. It's,
there's different types of offerings. So if you're outside of the U.S., like you can do a Reg S offering.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. But we also have, the Reg D here. And so for that, you need like documentation verifying your net worth, W-2s, Form 1099s, things of that nature. And so we actually, with the LAO, created a pretty nice flow for that to make it as easy as possible. So people can kind of just like input their information and we on the back end just
that makes
and let them know and then whitelist their address so they're able to contribute the date of launch.
Okay, so then can you still, so those funds, for example, in Decentraland, those funds can still apply even though they weren't, the money didn't come from investors. Well, I mean, technically it did because that's how they raised money, right? Like they came through.
Are you talking about the DAO pool for Decentraland?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess that's like really the only difference is like the pool that we currently have is it's a
like
percentage of the crowdfunded pool from the ICO launch of the platform.
Right.
In the LAO's case, it's kind of like it's beginning like on the 28th, correct? Like the LAO is officially launching in a few days.
Yeah, so if you are interested in joining as a member, you can actually get the approval for the accreditation, but we're actually launching so you could purchase units into the LAO on Tuesday. And each member can purchase up to 9 units just because we don't want to have like a majority member who can just vote on whatever proposals they want. So we limit it to 9 units out of 100 for each purchase. And for 1 unit, it's 120 ETH.
Okay. So if you own 9 units, does that mean you have 9 times of the voting influence as somebody who has 1?
Yeah. So you have that weight, right?
Yeah. The voting weight. Okay. Yeah. So I guess the question is, it's 2 different funding sources between the LAO and Decentraland. And we're kind of trying to figure out if the LAO has any, I guess, like franchise aspirations as far as like, if any DAO that needs either legal assistance in figuring out how they can manage their funds and the projects for the community to make sure we're abiding by regulations. We're not some kind of like Wild West.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Is it something we have to figure out ourselves and maybe the LAO kind of guides us how to do it, contingent on the already existent DAO we have, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
go
great
ahead.
question. So yeah, no, we definitely do have aspirations to extend this to different protocols. We've talked to several other large protocols that want to do something for profit. So you can imagine like a large protocol creating a community-driven DAO that's adjacent to their protocol, and they only invest in projects that want to build out that protocol. So we've talked to different like tokens and protocols that are interested in doing something of that nature. So we definitely do foresee that. Of course, if there's like some sort of custom legal work involved, I mean, we're more of the software administrator, so we're not necessarily like doing a ton of legal structuring. But as far as like the actual pipes, we're happy to do that and put that together and work with any lawyers to do so. That said, most of the framework works, if you're talking about something for profit, are probably pretty standard, and we think that a lot of what we're building will become pretty standardized. So, you know, our intent, kind of like what YC did with like the safe agreements, and they kind of have this really standard model. Like we kind of want to do that with the LAO in a way, like kind of have this out of the box for profit venture thing. So if that's, I mean, I would love to hear a little bit more about your DAO and seeing how the parallels are, but that's definitely something that we're interested in and have spoken to other folks about. We're really focused on getting this one right at the gate, but we're going to, I mean, I even want to do like a Bitcoin DAO. I think that would be awesome to like do an Ethereum DAO for Bitcoin development and have the investors wrap their BTC into this DAO. I think that could be kind of cool, a good way to bridge the two blockchains and two communities too. So we're definitely trying to like think like that as well.
So how do you get started? I mean, so like, I think there's a separation of like two ideas here. It's one where we can apply the LAO to an existing DAO, and then we have investors all over the world investing into the LAO platform so that people can invest in projects, right? So the LAO holders would invest in these projects. So to get started, do you just have to go through a KYC process, and then you can make that investment? Like, what's the flow there?
Yeah, here. Maybe I'll just share my screen here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Powers of Zoom. It's a very nice app.
This is the front page. This is where projects can apply for funding. This is where you can join as a member. So just some background, we kind of really nudge you and guide you in a way to make sense of it, but let's do that. And you can really like fill out whatever information is necessary. We collect that, you upload your ownership of that organization.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's a pretty easy flow.
It's almost like applying for a loan or something like that.
Yeah, and it's like 3 like pages, and then we have our own thing on. I'm not going to fill this out, but on the back end where we just collect that and then approve. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and yeah, that's the idea.
So I guess if Decentraland wanted to, like, potentially this could be like broken down into individual categories for all the separate DAOs that are on the LAO infrastructure. So it would be like there'd be a LAO DAO fund, and then you could choose a Decentraland DAO fund. It'll be like a whole separate group of investors who are working to approve, these projects, et cetera, right?
Yeah, we were like even thinking about like eventually like there could just be like a LAO dashboard with like
exactly.
And like if you're an accredited investor, you can just kind of like go through, and with the Moloch contracts, you can rage quit too. So if you want to rage quit your DAO, you can maybe float into another one, and it's like this very fluid process. So yeah, I mean that's definitely something like down the line that we've considered too. So yeah, definitely.
So if you rage quit, let's say I invest $100,000, right, and I spend 2 years with the LAO and I rage quit. Does that mean I take my principal plus everything I've earned, or what does that mean specifically?
So no, you get to take, I mean, with the exception of like the gas costs and all that, so just subtracting that,
sure.
You get to take out all your undeployed capital. So, but you still get rights to the project. So if you
I see.
Like helped vote and contributed to voting on projects, you still have that stake in that project, but anything that's been undeployed, you take.
Gotcha. So if I had invested 100,000 and a year later, the fund had invested 50,000 of my, or 50% of my initial investment, I can take out the 50K, but I still have that ownership in the investments, correct?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with Decentraland, so we have a kind of an interesting position between Iman and myself with Decentraland is that, like you mentioned earlier, we created an application. It's sort of like a marketplace in Decentraland. So in this marketplace, you can have developers of any kind develop something for your land. And so one of our developers created a couple of games. And these are many games that can be deployed within Decentraland. So you can have a parcel deploy one of our games as sort of like a franchising model, where there's 25 of these games in existence, and you can buy one, deploy one on your land, and earn passive income on your land with this game. And so we created this application that makes it really easy. So in a few clicks, you can deploy pretty much anything that you want on your land, which if you don't use this application, it's pretty cumbersome. You almost have to be a coder to deploy something on your land. So we created this thing, and it's been pretty successful thus far. I mean, Decentraland launched in February 20th, 2020, and we were able to generate a pretty good amount of revenue over that 2 month plus span. And so we have an interesting perspective from the LAO perspective, is that we could be proposing for an investment, but also we can also be using the LAO as a mechanism, as a governance model for sustainability within Decentraland.
Yeah.
And so that's I think what's really attractive from our point of view. And I think we have a responsibility in the sense that since Decentraland is like a true DAO, like we have to convince everybody to really accept the concept of the LAO and the sustainability of it, and we have to convince everybody. So I think that's like one of our main objectives, because I personally like the LAO. I think it has the best implementation for sustainability, because I always talk about that. I always talk about having things sustainable, because if you're a developer, Pri, and you look at Decentraland, and you see that you have an open world. You can build anything that you want, and if you don't see people like walking around Decentraland, there's less of an incentive for you to build anything and spend that time, right?
Right.
And so we have to, with this grant money from the DAO, we have to sustain it so that we're always attracting developers. We're always bringing them in to create, kind of like an environment where people want to come back, essentially. And I think with the LAO, I think that has the best implementation of that approach. So do you want to talk about some of the projects that you guys are publicly talking about that are working with the LAO or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You mean projects that are creating LAOs? We're still in the early talks of that, so
Sure.
I probably wouldn't want to share that. But there are different projects that have applied to the LAO. So we've had about 25 plus projects. We're still letting the projects that have applied are private at this point. We're going to give them the optionality to make their profiles public and share that. We haven't yet done that, so I don't really want to.
Sure.
But I mean, that said, like we've had a ton of projects apply. We've talked to a ton of projects that want to apply as well. But I think what's interesting that we built, which you might like as far as a community tool, is this thing called the LAO Scout.
Okay.
So what it is, I don't know if you guys ever played around with TCR Party. Did you ever do that like last year? Basically, it was like a token curated registry that is tied to Twitter, a Twitter bot. And you were able to nominate different Twitter handles of crypto Twitter influencers. And you had a certain allocated token amount. You would nominate them. You could challenge their position in this leaderboard as well. So if you thought someone wasn't an influencer, you would try to challenge them with your tokens as well through your Twitter, in your Twitter DMs. And you could like request more tokens every day through a faucet. So it was kind of like this gamified crypto influencer board that emerged, and it was pretty fun. We thought it could be interesting to adapt that into our model, in that we could have the larger crypto Twitter community nominate projects that they think should apply to the LAO or are worthy of funding and put them on some sort of leaderboard.
Right.
So when you're talking about, and you want to signal to members, because part of the reason we built LAO Scout is like, unfortunately, most people aren't accredited investors. You're obviously have to meet a certain qualification and can't do that. So this is a really way to get like the wider crypto swath of people to get involved. And oftentimes, I mean, traditional VC has missed out on really great projects in crypto too. And like, I don't know about you, but if you're on crypto Twitter enough, you can kind of suss out what projects people are talking about, new projects that have emerged from a hackathon or something like that look really good and are further developing. So, we thought it'd be kind of nice to crowdsource that through this bot. And so I can maybe just like quickly show you the leaderboard right now.
Yes,
but
please.
I think some of these projects have applied to be allowed. So, and by the way that you actually like can get this going and actually do it yourself is just tweet out, "Hey, at the LAO Scout, let's get started," and then you'll automatically get a Twitter DM, asking you a question to verify you're human, and then you can start nominating or challenging projects.
Oh, interesting.
So it's pretty simple.
So if you nominate a project, say somebody nominates MetaZone, our project, and then we go through the filtering process, and when we get approved, then that nominator gets some kind of points and gets moved up to leaderboard for being successfully bringing on like a project to the platform.
Yeah, it's more of like a signal to the community that like a lot of people like your projects, and maybe even potentially like motivating the project to apply to LAO if they haven't already, or also signaling to the members that like, listen, the wider community really thinks this project has legs. Like maybe you should take it seriously and fund it.
Awesome.
So this is like what we have so far. It's super simple. I've already actually gone through this and like run out of actual tokens. So I've been like hitting the faucet every day, but this is kind of how it works. So once you do that, "Hey, at the LAO Scout, let's get started," you get pinged a series of questions, and then you just start nominating projects.
Interesting.
And it's all through that, and then
So the projects themselves is what's on the leaderboard, not necessarily the nominators, right?
No,
it's the projects.
Yeah, and so okay, what's kind of cool about this too is, let me just so if you want to see all of the actions on the back end of like what's happening, who's being challenged. So like, for example, here we've had, this is all this activity that's going on with LAO Scout. If you actually want to see, if you want to follow like the best projects on Twitter, you can go to @the-LAO Scout. This is not the bot, and it retweets all of the projects' latest tweets. So it's kind of like a nice way to also get tweets from like the best projects in crypto. You want to like keep up to date with them. So it's kind of a nice tool to get the broader community. You should, I would nominate you guys if I had the tokens, but you should
nominate ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, people have done that.
Yeah. So this brings up a question to me, is like kind of like what the business model is for the LAO itself, meaning like, what if just envision a future where there's like tons of proposals. So like, what's the rate of acceptance? Meaning like, is there like a throttle you guys have to keep in mind so you're not just putting out too much capital and not bringing enough in to where like the whole thing collapses? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so that's, that's going to be hard to say. We at OpenLaw we're mostly the software administrator. So that's going to be a question to the members, what their investment thesis is. Like once the members come together and talk and decide how they want to deploy capital, because right now, like we're keeping it really simple. We don't really want to do too much, future thinking around this, just to limit what like kind of amazing stuff could emerge. So we have kept it pretty open. So I think like the members could propose, we've had a prospective member say that he, would want someone helping with securing deal flow and making sure the projects that have applied are at a certain level of quality. You can imagine the LAO members coming together and hiring someone to do that, for example, or someone, someone's designate. They can nominate someone to do that. So there's a lot of governance that is going to be totally member driven. And to your point, like how they deploy capital and how frequently they invest in projects. My feeling is, I mean, I don't know, because it hasn't been open and this is really like an experiment waiting to happen.
Totally.
And I'm sure every LAO would be different depending on the membership, but my feeling is that they'll probably be pretty conservative to start.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, and then
which is a good thing, right?
I think that they'll operate like in a way like traditional VC, where they're just not like throwing money around.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Traditional VC, usually they get a return on their investment after a startup makes a sale, sells to a different company or something to that effect. So does the LAO, I guess the LAO is set up to expect these different kind of scenarios, right?
Yeah. So like if a project they invest in decided to do a token, have a token event, then LAO members like could have, a piece of that. And we have that, accounted for in the convertible note as well. If they have like some sort of liquidation event, like an M&A, or they get bought, then we would just convert whatever that is in DAI and distribute that. So it would really operate very similarly to what we see today.
So would you say that the LAO is really focused on crypto projects in the sense that each project that the LAO funds has to have a token, right?
No,
they don't. Okay.
No.
So it could be just straight equity then.
Yes. It is.
Interesting.
Like, I would imagine that's mostly going to be it, but we can keep the optionality of tokens too.
Interesting. Yeah, because to me it would seem probably easier to be able to do the LAO kind of in an automated sense if let's say MetaZone has like a token sale, right? And then we raise funds through the LAO, right? Let's say 30% goes to the LAO. It'd just be easier just to transfer 30% of the tokens to the LAO, and instead of dealing with equity, right?
Yeah, and I think the members can really choose that too. Like if they want to do that, they can do that, and if that's really going to be an answer for them to decide. But that optionality we totally get, and
sure.
So that's I think that's actually what makes this project a bit unique too. Is like you kind of can set up for that before, and if you could be a project that initially starts with equity and then decides a year later based on your protocol that you built that you want to do a token sale, like you have that optionality to be really flexible.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that you could do that.
So yeah, it's pretty great in that regard. And but again, it's really token or equity, where it's
So all of the matters that are being discussed, it's all internal amongst the 100 members, correct? Like it's not so much as like a transparent thing where outside people can kind of peek in to see what's going on.
No. Yeah, I think like some of those pieces of how they actually want the governance of the LAO to operate. I mean, maybe eventually that'll be up to them too. I mean, if they want to share some of their learnings.
Because I'm thinking again how to apply this to Decentraland DAO, and I'm kind of like keeping the same like a legality regulations that you guys have already spent all your time investigating and figuring out like what's the right way to do things, but at the same time kind of maintaining this whole community as a whole, DAO infrastructure. So I was thinking maybe there's a way for the whole community to vote in these 100 delegates instead of just allowing like the first 100 who show up to kind of like get placement in this thing. So it's kind of like they have to campaign for their position within the LAO itself.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, actually.
Yeah, that way there's an incentive to be open, because if they're doing something wrong, they can get voted out by the entire community as a whole. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I haven't really thought about that. It feels like representative government. It's almost like
exactly. That's kind of like the whole craziness. Yeah, for profit. And but
then for those, like, what incentive do those people have to care who's in the LAO?
I guess like the overall success of the platform, because in our case, majority of the community members own land, which is like an actual pretty expensive asset, and they own the cryptocurrency Mana. So and the valuation of these things won't go up unless the platform overall succeeds. And like,
right.
The governance structure, the funding models that we create is pretty much like the foundational layer of whether or not this thing's going to actually, work. You know what I mean? So everyone kind of has like an incentive to want to, work together. But I understand, like, you don't want the hive mind to make decisions, right? Because they're not necessarily always correct on things.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So there are kind of like specialized knowledge bases that need to be appointed to, decide on certain matters. You know what I mean?
That's an interesting question. That's something that I would venture you would have to think about.
I could see like in your case where it's not necessary because
you're not a legal shareholder, but you're just some person who wants to vote for someone who's a part of who's a legal.
Exactly. So like the liability all still rests on like the 100 members because they're actually like the accredited investors, but they still have to go through some kind of like community approval process. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would be interesting to think about. I haven't actually thought of that. But I like the idea.
Do we have the flexibility to implement something like that, like specifically for the Decentraland LAO?
I mean, I would imagine you would, but that's again something I feel like I would probably have to like think a little bit more about
because of the legalities, right?
Yeah, like I'm not entirely sure how that would work.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
But that's a really interesting idea. Like I think that's kind of cool, and it's a good way to get like the wider community involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, because essentially we have the vested interest to make sure the project is successful no matter what the project is. So if we have a community aligned, that makes the most sense to implement. But I for sure, I mean, the legal issues is a big deal because in Decentraland, you could post up nefarious content, I mean, theoretically, and there's very little ways to take it down, right? And so there's legal implications for doing that. And so there's a discussion right now on the legalities of who's liable in a situation like that. Is it Decentraland or is it the landowner?
Right.
And so those are the kind of conversations that we tend to have and figure out, like, what do we do in those situations? Another thing I wanted to understand is like with Iman and I, we're not accredited investors. So is there
far from it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of legal way to get involved in these investments that you know of that we should look into? Some kind of regulation that we can take part of?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you look outside the U.S., but it's like really hard to get into this. I think limiting yourself outside of the U.S. is just not like long-term scalable, in my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like that's a question. That's like the golden ticket. I feel like you could really kind of try to work around that. We're thinking pretty creatively. Again, like I said, we're taking that Coinbase approach where we like start reasonable and do everything like above board and right. And we're obviously everything we're going to continue to do is above board and correct. And,
for sure.
But that said, it's like you could maybe try to think about like creative ways to try to get the thing is like the solicitation around that. There's a lot of questions about, so you'd have to, we're thinking about ways we could make that work. As of now, it's a pretty tough standard. I know that there is talks at the SEC level about maybe making the accreditation standard a little bit less rigid. I'm skeptical of that actually happening anytime soon, but
what if the option was that an intelligent investor could be an accredited investor? Like for example, Iman and I pretty much know the ins and outs of a lot of the cryptocurrencies from the technical standpoint and then from the economic standpoint. And so maybe there's some way that we could pass some knowledge base to be considered a accredited investor. But I don't even know if that's like even possible from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, I think like the token sale people, when that was the legal lawyers around that were thinking about that too. Like the unfortunate thing is part of the accredited investor standard and why that exists at a certain price point is like the SEC sort of assumed that if you had a certain net worth, you were savvy enough and smart enough so that's like unfortunately where they drew the line as far as how like having a certain network worth equals savviness. And So that's yeah. I mean, there's plenty of people who are, I think, have a pretty good understanding of like markets and how they operate, but they still can't necessarily gauge. So maybe we can petition the SEC to try to change the standard.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's like a lot of people complain about that. It's like I've talked to people in the space and outside of the space. Like if there's one thing that they could change, it would, like anything in as far as regulations go, it would be that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you go back to 2017 and the whole ICO craze, I don't think the majority of those funds were coming from accredited investors. I mean, unless, like, what do you think?
A lot of VPNs.
A lot of VPNs, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like KYC checks, but it was like, it's kind of, it's really pretty easy to like have a passport photo of someone else in another country.
Right. So
this brings up a question of mine. Well, not so much a question, but just kind of like a thought exploration of like what differences do you see as far as like the comparisons or the parallels between that 2017 ICO boom and like spectacle of white paper funding where almost everything was BS.
Yeah.
Like so like what how do you envision these LAOs and DAOs as far as like stricter guidelines when it comes to approval of these projects? Like I don't know, like do you expect a project to actually have to have a working product with like already generating revenue in order to get acceptance? Or
well, no, because so our I mean, it's an entirely different structural model. So I think they're both similar in that they are used to pool together capital, but the structures to which they're like pulling together, like there's no widely distributed token or secondary trading of a token or anything like that. You're like in an organized organization that's actually filed to, in our case, Delaware. And it's a US based entity. And so, I mean, the entire structure is pretty different. It is similar in that you're pulling together capital. But again, like there's no,
I guess it's subjective, right? Like it's up to the voters.
I think this is like the right way. If you want to raise capital, I think this is like the right way to do it. I think the ICO boom was not necessarily the right way to do it, but I think the unfortunate thing is we don't have, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty around that, whereas here we can actually is more certainty. We know LLCs have been in existence it was started in Wyoming. It's been, which is cool because they've actually are kind of on the forefront when it comes to some of these like legal structures. But I mean, it's a known structure. We have like concrete rules around that. We're more or less adapting that to fit into, the blockchain world. So it's a little bit different. Even now, like the security token slog, like that's going to take some time to actually sort out. So I think that's more like a wait and see approach. Whereas like here, we actually can do it in a little way.
I'm curious if, let's say, we have that conversation with Decentraland and the community and all that, and when they agree that LAO makes the most sense to implement, is this really a technical implementation, or is it just a matter of saying that we're using the LAO's dashboard to facilitate the funds?
So we would have to do some sort of like, we would have to work with you guys and like redo the front end, the mechanics and everything, the dashboard. I mean, it's going to look probably the same as what we have here. And I actually we published a walkthrough today, like the project proposal process, a quick video. I can share that to you guys later, or share that with you later. But I mean, it would look relatively similar. You just probably would have some front end changes and like have your own like dashboard, but there wouldn't be one dashboard with every.
Oh, I see.
Maybe eventually we'll get to that point, but right now, I mean, this is our first one. So
essentially it's just a bunch of API calls. So like if we would create our own dashboard and then we just do a bunch of call outs to whatever functionality that we need from the LAO.
Yeah. I mean, we would probably like reformat the LAO, and maybe it might be helpful like to understand our business model as far as OpenLaw, like where our fees really come in. So we take so like we take 2% the first year, and that depreciates annually for 4 years, which makes sense. and it's pretty in line. I mean, like, for example, we handle things like mailing out annual K1s and kind of that
All
like
right. Yep.
stuff. Like,
Yep.
so all of that, and also just setting this up and like the time we put in and all of that, it's a pretty nominal fee for how much we're doing it. And compared to VCs, they have like the 2 and 20 model where they have 2% operational and then fee, and then they have like the 20% of whatever profit goes back to the fund, and we're not taking a carry at all. So that goes back in the pocket of investors, which actually makes the model actually quite friendly to investors.
So the existing, let's say like Decentraland has an existing pool of money. Does that have different legal implications from a management standpoint than actually raising funds through the LAO?
I'm sorry, repeat that. Sorry, my mom's like knocking.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
I was like, oh.
Yeah, the question is, so if you have an existing pool of funds, does that have different legal ramifications or limitations from the standpoint of the LAO, or do funds need to be raised through a LAO platform in order to be governed by the LAO?
No, they should be raised through the LAO platform.
Oh, okay.
If you're asking, like, maybe if you could have, like, we kind of jokingly call them like baby LAOs as members of the LAO. I don't know if like you're trying to build connections between like different LAOs, but like you could imagine a LAO being a member of a LAO.
Well, specifically, like if, like for example, Decentraland already has 220 million mana, so that's a pool. And what I was envisioning initially was we govern that pool of money through the LAO mechanism, where that money gets invested into projects, and the projects hopefully do a return on investments to keep the DAO funded past the 10 years. So
by accredited investors.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that would be possible. Yeah.
Okay. Because the other option would be is that you have a fund where grants are happening, and then you have a separate LAO fund within Decentraland where accredited investors invest to make a profit, and the grant money is just grant money.
Grant money, yeah. And we've talked to a lot of different protocols that are thinking about doing something similar too, because I mean the grant thing makes sense too.
Yeah, because it's important to
some grant DAOs too. I don't know if you have like at all paid attention to marketing DAO, or I think Metacartel also is doing some grant work too. But there's like quite a few of those as well. Probably worth looking
Have you looked at MakerDAO and the whole DeFi ecosystem?
I mean, yeah, a bit here and there, but
okay.
Yeah,
because that would be an interesting integration. Some of the funds that are being held by the LAO could be, I guess, invested into the DeFi just to make interest on that funds just being held there until there's an investment.
I mean, honestly, like we were kind of joking, like, I mean, like if the members want to take it and just put it into a bunch of DeFi protocols and just like have that as their, they can just do that. So, and just kind of have a return. So yeah, you could do that, have it, rather than it just sit there, you could have it, put it to work, I guess.
Yeah.
If that's work.
Yeah. That makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So I-Man, what do you think so far? Does that like help clear up some of the questions that you had?
Oh yeah, clears out a bunch of things. But like I think what I'm starting to understand about a lot of questions I have with not just the LAO but our own DAO. Whenever we interviewed the Decentraland team themselves, the main key point that I'm recognizing is like to be determined. You know what I mean? Because these DAOs still have to figure things out on their own. Essentially, like Pri said, it's just one big experiment we're all embarking on right now. We don't really know what the hell these organizations are going to think of, how to best manage or govern and stuff like that. So
what's cool is that, no, go on, sorry.
No, that's pretty much it. Like most of my questions stem from like, I'm trying to like spitball ideas, like how to govern these things, but I'm just one guy, right? Like I don't mean shit. The whole idea is supposed to be like, everyone's got to agree to these things, right? So there's going to be nonstop debate about these topics,
And that's the thing. It's like every LAO or DAO can look a little bit different. Like you structurally could be the same, but like the people, I mean, you still have a human component. You can't automate away everything. So like the investment thesis, or, depending on how conservative or experimental a certain group of DAO members or LAO members are really changes the governance of the structure too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. So like if we see a few of these emerge, like let's say we fill this one up really quickly and decide to spin up another one, which we can do fast, like it would be interesting to see just like psychologically, like the difference between the membership and how they decide to govern it and what projects they choose to invest in.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So it almost makes me want to, like, for every single post from now on, to advocate for the LAO, because I think this is one of the mechanisms that you can fund a bunch of projects that wouldn't be ideal for venture capitalists. I think you mentioned in your interview with CoinDesk was that the idea of venture capitalists is sort of limited because they're not going to invest in Bitcoin. They're not going to invest in Ethereum, right?
Like Tornado Cash even is like a little bit dicey.
Exactly. And so you wouldn't expect these VCs to make those investments, but look at, Bitcoin and Ethereum right now. I mean, that would have been a pretty smart investment early on, right? And so something like with the LAO, I think it's going to fund things that aren't going to get a traditional investment, but are equally as successful as anything else.
Right.
And so that's sort of my attraction. So what I was saying earlier was that, we could apply for an investment as well, but we could also use the LAO. And I think so the application itself, it sort of requires like the community to nominate you, right? And so
Totally.
I'm already starting to think of ways to like trying to get the community to focus on the LAO and understand what it is so that they can start leveraging their projects to the LAO as well.
Yeah, they could totally apply for funding.
Yeah.
So I mean, they could absolutely do that.
Yeah. So do you have any other updates? Like I think on Tuesday you're gonna launch this thing, and it's really. Do you have some sort of goal on terms of like how much money you're trying to raise with all these investors? Like what's the goal?
So, I mean it rounds out to about 2.5 million ETH, but it's like 120 ETH for one unit, and there's 100. So 12,000 units.
12,000 units. Okay.
I'm doing the math right there. And so, I mean, it should be pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how quickly the entire LAO fills. We've had a pretty nice group of people already apply for just to get the accreditation checks. We've had, a good group there. My feeling is that it'll close pretty quickly. That said, if you're a project and you need like kind of early stage funding or really any stage, but, given the check amounts, I would say earlier, I would apply, or if you go on the lao.io and click a project that wants to be funded, just basically more or less, we just like need a little information about yourself, a pitch deck, a white paper if there is one.
Nice. Okay.
A link to your site, maybe some information about you. We've kept it again, like I said, really open because we want to really have this come organically. And so if there's any information you think would be relevant to members, please provide that, and they'll probably reach out.
I was just gonna say, I envision like starting out with a blank slate, and then let's just see what the community just submits. If the community submits like really advanced videos, for example, they spend $100K on this like video, and that's what gets funded. Like then it's really up to us to figure out how to make videos for our companies, right? It just really depends on like what actually gets funded and what the company used for that proposal, right?
Yeah. And we're like in uncharted territories, right? Because like traditional VC, it's like you have to go to Silicon Valley or New York and like you meet them on several occasions and hop on calls and go through your deck. And so, doing it this way, there's going to definitely be some like novel means to which people communicate their projects. Maybe it's like, I had this dev diligence my code and he's a really well-known dev. Like he gave 5 stars, whatever. I'm making it up. But like you can imagine different standards emerging in this as a way for members to be,
I totally.
Would you be open to kind of like maybe like a virtual Shark Tank scenario? I mean, we have the perfect platform in Decentraland to kind of do something.
That's a great idea.
We're literally calling it LAO Tank, so it's funny that you mentioned that.
Oh, that's awesome.
But we literally have a district in Decentraland called Crypto Valley. That'd probably be like the best place to host it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, we were thinking about doing that like maybe a few weeks after we launched, but like maybe picking like because Y Combinator and others like have I like him. I want to do it different, but I think it's like interesting to see what the VCs have done because I mean to some extent it's successful. So we were thinking maybe like having 3 or 4 projects like pitch. I didn't talk about it, but we also have like a mentor portal. So we've gathered like 20 plus folks in the Ethereum community who, you've probably heard of and at least follow on Twitter and have talked a lot about early men and women who are really active, everything from like PR marketing to technologists to, legal. A LAO funded project can go to the mentor portal, email them and establish a relationship, whether that be pro bono mentorship, equity for an official advisor, or just like a short-term gig. Like if you want to kick some, we have like Amanda Cassett who's helping with the marketing DAO. If you want to kick her $5K to like help with a marketing campaign for your project, you could do that. So the idea is again, we're keeping that very open and flexible too. We're maybe going to incorporate personal tokens into this mentor portal, so you could like purchase like a private Uniswap exchange and like purchase someone's time, one of the mentors' time. That might not be for V1, but that's something that we've discussed. But sorry, not to go too far.
No, you're good.
But like golden nuggets.
I think that they're like we're gonna do a LAO tank thing, but then there's also gonna have like this mentorship component as well. So yeah, we're definitely thinking outside the box.
So speaking of mentorship, do the investors have access to the proposals, like the people behind the proposals, or is it just purely like whatever you submit? That's the only mechanism that the investors can see whether or not they should invest in the project.
They have like their email and names and everything.
Oh, okay.
You can have that. So if the members wanted to email them or set up a Zoom call to learn more, they're definitely going to.
Okay, perfect.
Like we at OpenLaw, being the software administrator, will help facilitate any of that as well. Gotcha.
All right, Pri, I know you have another call to get to, so we really, really appreciate you joining us. Yeah. Hopefully we can have you back on, and this is like I think this is one of the most fascinating projects since like I think DeFi, and I'm really pulling for the LAO.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's gonna like really be a groundbreaking thing if we really pull it off. And maybe in a couple of weeks, once it's actually launched, we can come back and share some of the interesting learnings, because there's definitely going to be some.
Oh, absolutely! We'd love to have you back on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye bye.
You take it easy.
You too.
All right, man. That was Pri Desai from OpenLaw, and
pretty intense, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not like sweating bullets over here or nothing, but that was very.
It was informative because there's a whole lot of like, because I'm really interested in like the technical standpoint of OpenLaw and the LAO and its implementation of how it affects like a project like Decentraland. And I was curious to find out like how it's actually implemented. Is it just some website you go to? And
I think those are things they haven't really hashed out yet, because they're still trying to prove the concept amongst themselves. You know what I mean? Like it's like they're trialing out the whole.
Yeah, and we're probably putting the cart before the horse in the sense that we're trying to apply this functionality to an existing DAO when they're from the ground up. It's like we start with raising funds. And then once we raise funds, then we invest in projects.
Yeah, it's like a very specialized purpose DAO. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like versus Decentraland. Yeah.
I was just gonna say versus like Decentraland, where there's an existing pool, and we need some mechanism to disperse that pool so that pool regenerates its funds.
Exactly.
And so. But it can still be implemented. It's just there's
like you said, it's like a side pool almost.
It's a side pool, exactly.
Yeah, like we have this already existent pool. Yeah, because it's kind of, I guess, like this current pool, it belongs to the community, not to any group of 100 people. You can't just have like 100 people who have accredited investor status and be like, okay, now we control these community funds. You know what I mean?
That's true.
That might cause some.
See, but
I'd imagine that wouldn't even get approved.
No, that wouldn't get approved. I was imagining that we would have 100 members decision makers for the existing pool. And those decision makers are based upon like whether or not a project can do a return on investment.
Yeah.
And so that's how I was thinking of the LAO, and it could still be implemented in that way. It's just it's not out of the box like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I think maybe even 100 members is too much for Decentraland.
Yeah, we should have asked her where that 100 came from.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
I mean, to kind of decentralize it as much as possible, right? Like 100 is a pretty decent number.
Yeah, hundreds. Yeah.
I mean, like, what's the difference between 20 and 100? I guess 80. So it feels a little more decentralized in the sense that like, there's not as much potential for collusion if there's 100 members and stuff. But see, that's the big thing, man. That's the only thing I worry about with this LAO is because, yeah, it's a very private organization, meaning like only these 100 members. But that's okay, I guess. Yeah, that's okay in their endeavor because the decisions of that 100 people, it only impacts them. You know what I mean? Their own community of 100 people. So that's trying to translate that to Decentraland, where there's like a huge community where like every decision, like this small group, the small committee member of like, you know, specialists or whatever, their decisions impact a lot more people.
Yeah, that's a good word, a committee. Yeah, because if the committee is like, they have the understanding that their goal is to replenish the funds via a return on investment, then they're going to have to invest only in projects where they believe it's going to be, get some ROI. And that may not be like sustainable either.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these Decentraland issues, like we touched on this a little bit in our Discord. We had a little conversation about like the debate about SDK, who decides SDK upgrades and development. You know what I mean? Is it totally open source for everyone?
Well, I think I'll take a stab at that. I think the way it's going to work is you will update the SDK as a developer. You'll just update it, and then you submit your update into to GitHub, and then once I think at that point that's where the vote happens. Like, should this update, should this change in the SDK be reflected on the full release of the SDK, right? And I think that's when the vote happens.
But that's the thing. Then it's like, are those super technical matters, debates, whatever you want to call them, should that be left up to the community as a whole, or should the community again delegate?
That's a good question.
Like a smaller group of qualified individuals, to make these make or break decisions, because SDK can make or break the platform. I'm guessing, so it's kind of something very delicate that needs to be. It's almost like who controls the nuclear launch button. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
It's just a sensitive thing that maybe not like everyone has access to, but everyone has that option to choose who's in control of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to apply for a wide range of governance issues, including like who's in charge of the finances of the platform. Maybe some people have a better sense of how to manage capital than others.
Yeah, because think about it. Let's say we propose MetaZone for like a grant, right? And that grant is for X amount of mana, and somebody has to, I guess the community just votes on say, hey, MetaZone should get that grant because this and that. And my perspective, my perspective on this is like, we have to be careful with, who we grant mana to, because the money will disappear.
Yep.
And so I'm always thinking about sustainable ways. And then when you brought up the LAO, I was like, well, this is a slam dunk, right? This is the mechanism. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see any other way of doing it. I mean, that's how the world has operated. And yeah, it's, we could criticize, the whole economic system that we're in right now, but it's that's our starting point, really, like in Decentraland. And we can't take those funds like lightly.
I agree, because it's not likely that, at least not in the current state of the platform, that we could generate a sizable investor pool if we launch like our own independent LAO for Decentraland, just because there's not enough interest. Not like there is for Ethereum projects, right? Ethereum is an already established platform that's been around for 5 or 6 years or whatever. So there's like tons of people on the sidelines with freaking cash in hand, like, dude, what can I put my money in?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, in Decentraland, it's not the case yet. So it's not likely that we'll be able to launch our own independent LAO, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that we have to figure out how to manage what we got, you know?
Yeah, we're looking more into a governance model rather than a funding model.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed.
Even though the funding is going to be important, like I still think there should be a pool of funds that are dedicated to like an ROI. Sort of like the games that we created, they're dedicated to an ROI. Like that's why they exist. And I think having a separate fund might help with that concept.
Yeah.
But the real question is the governance of the existing fund. That's
something we need to address in the near term. This whole LAO and like maybe like these up and coming STO platforms can kind of like assist as well, meaning where like it's more of like an open. Well, no, that's not even they are accredited investors only, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's like the big barrier right now. I mean, I would love to figure out a way to where the whole community can just stake their own mana into like this kind of funding Kickstarter type pool, and get their fair share based on their allocation.
No, absolutely. Well, one thing I found interesting for the LAO was that they can still implement the LAO just based purely on equity, and literally equity is just just a breakdown of the ownership of that project. And it's different. The reason why I bring this up is different than having tokens represent the equity, because it's tokens is like it's almost like a tangible asset that you can just trade.
Yeah, and more liquid, right?
More liquid and programmable. So as soon as you get that investment from the LAO, you to get that $1 million investment, you transfer 30 million MetaZone tokens to the LAO fund, right? And that represents the equity within MetaZone. And I would think that that's how they started, but you can do that with equity, which is cool, because then any company that has any idea not related to cryptocurrency can be involved and get funding from the LAO.
Totally. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, I
didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I figured that the LAO would just be focused on like crypto projects that are building it. Even you can have a crypto project that has a token that has really nothing to do with cryptocurrency. That token just represents the equity.
Have you heard of like, fuck, I wish I knew. It was like, it's called GitHub? No, not GitHub. It's like a crowdfunding platform on Ethereum. Vitalik talks about it all the time.
Huh.
God damn it. Let me see if I can find it. But Gitcoin grants.
Gitcoin.
Can you pull that up? Yeah, Gitcoin.
Yeah.
Let's just kind of like look at it if you can, like pull it on the screen. I looked at it the other day and I was like, damn, this is pretty interesting actually. There's like lots of, for some reason, the majority of the proposals are like podcasters trying to like kickstart their podcast.
Oh, really?
I was like, dude, we should probably fucking be on this bitch, like there's not many specified on like the metaverse topic, you know what I mean? So maybe we can get a Gitcoin grant to actually like have a decent functioning studio.
Yeah.
Get rid of that goddamn ISIS background.
ISIS.
Like, get some color and some life into our studio.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Let me see.
Maybe like we can get our own young Jamie too. Who knows?
This is what you're talking about, right?
Yep. This is it. I mean, I think there's got to be a page. Oh yeah, this is it. You just scroll down, you see like what's being proposed, what's being funded. Look at that, dude. 19,000 DAI for okay.
COVID ventilators, and we got Kenyan crisis aid, and got Bitcoin Malaysia DAO. What is that? So, largest crypto community our country has, founded in 2012. Interesting.
Yeah. So you could think of these as like, I imagine this is kind of like what the LAO's dashboard might look like. Maybe like you know, somebody puts forth a proposal, it gets displayed like this.
Yeah. So you, for example, if you're one of the 100 members, then this is what you see.
Exactly. Probably. And then you click on it and get the full pitch deck, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, because like they don't have really an incentive to publicly display these proposals, right? Because it's all internal.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm thinking. Yeah. But this is different. This is like a community crowdfunding platform on Ethereum, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So there is a reason for this to make this public. You know, if you want to contribute, go for it. But like, yeah, we could do this for Decentraland, man. Something like this. If we're gonna just throw out grants, this is the way to do it, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, create a little dashboard, have different projects.
Especially now, like with the DCL core guys, dude, they're coming up with like ideas, nonstop, every fucking day, dude. They got like a new campaign going for like a new event or like some new marketing thing.
Absolutely.
And all this needs funding, you know, and this is like the perfect little portal to actually get that going.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, DeFi Saver.
We should probably bring this up at the next roundtable. Let's see what the other guys think.
Yeah, Gitcoin grants.
Mm-hmm. But again,
so I mean, what's the incentive for the investor though? Like, they just want to see this project successful, so they just invest.
I have no idea. Like, I don't know, man. It's not like Kickstarter, right? Where you invest in a Kickstarter company and then they give you some kind of early access to whatever product they're trying to create or something like that.
Right.
There you go.
So like this guy, White Hat Hacking, it says, I find bugs in projects. Sometimes they're running on mainnet. Sometimes there's a lot of money at stake. If you want to support me and my research, this is one of the best ways to do it.
Wait, what? So you could support a hacker, and if he successfully hacks, he'll give you some money back?
I don't think so.
Oh, I find bugs in projects. Not.
Yeah, I think it's just like, yeah, I just don't understand. Like they just invest to help this guy out, and I guess that's it, right?
Check out stats. What does stats mean?
So I clicked on transactions.
What did it do? Nothing.
And nothing. It's loading, I guess. So we got 0.01 ETH. This guy, 23 DAI. 0.9 DAI.
Wow, not even $1, dude. Come on, man.
0.07 ETH.
This guy's getting almost 300 contributors, dude. That's a shit ton.
That is a shit ton. So here are the stats. So we got February 2020. We got, what is this? One-time contributions. Oh, these are all one-time contributions.
Okay. Yeah, this is. So this is just more examples of like what direction we're headed, I guess. Like,
yeah, I like the interface. I think you're right. This is like the way it should look for like projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not really sure why I brought this up, but anyways, back to Decentraland.
Yeah. Oh look, Chris Black.
I remember that guy. What's he asking here for? Just for like his YouTube channel, right? Or something.
So together we have turned the conversation around DeFi from a utopian echo chamber into a non-nonsense forum for transparency and risk assessment. I'm proud of the contributions. And
so this is just straight up like support me.
Yeah, that's basically. I mean?
Okay.
Okay. Well, this is more for us to understand like what things could look like and how we're going to piece this together.
Yeah, and like how much of a technical endeavor this actually is.
Yeah.
Is it even like something?
Yeah, that's true, man. If like imagine, let's say we have the community agree that Decentraland should be managed this way. Like, doesn't matter what way it is.
At least their grant funding.
Yeah, at least the grant funding. Let's say they agree, but there's like a technical element to it that requires developers to make some updates. It's like, well, I guess
so who does it?
I guess the fund pays for it then, right?
I don't know. That's what I always wonder, because in situations like this, I'd imagine like the Decentraland team would probably have to they're the ones who have the resources to pull something like this off, I guess. But I guess you're right. It would have to be like a community decision. Like we're going to invest a small portion of our community funds to fund the development of these,
Right.
these platforms. Or whatever.
So
that's interesting.
With the LAO, I think I'm really interested, like what happens on Tuesday, because I'm pretty confident that they're going to raise. It's going to be like an ICO in the sense that they're going to complete their funding like within minutes.
You think so?
Yeah.
It depends. It depends how many people are aware of this. I don't know how good their marketing has been up until this point.
Well, I mean, you ran into it, and
it's true.
I mean,
I'm like,
as soon as you brought it up, I was like, damn, this is it. Like, we need this. Not, I mean, from different perspectives too. Like we have a project already. We have we're heavily invested into Decentraland, which could use this in one way or another, right? Maybe not in its current implementation. There needs to be some tweaks to it, but Decentraland could use this. We could use this, and if we were accredited investors, I would have invested in this. Because this is like straight investment. This is like traditional investment. It's just done with smart contracts and is done, with token projects. Yeah. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So it almost feels like, yeah, we should get it, hop on this motherfucking boat before it even takes off. You know what I mean? Like this is, we might be looking at like a boat at dock that's literally about to
it's about to sail. Yeah.
Yeah. So So we really need to work on that pitch deck, in other words.
Yeah. Yeah, for
we
sure.
We need to bump that up on the Notion list a little bit. Like get cracking with that.
Yeah.
But
because the deck that we had was like pre-launch, and it was like
exactly.
Pennies compared to what we have now.
Yeah, like the product of MetaZone itself is completely different than what we thought it was like 3 months ago.
Pri actually brought up something like a big deal, like solicitation. We're not supposed to solicit publicly for an investment, right? That's against SEC rules.
So kind of like us talking about it right now is a bad thing?
No, it's not. We're not soliciting for an investment from anybody by us talking about it. But we cannot be like, on the podcast, hey, we're raising funds or whatever. Like we just
go. Well,
we're because think about it. Let's say the reason why you would invest into this raise is because you expect a return, and if you would expect a return, that is by default security, and if it's a security, then SEC rules apply, and so that's why you can't do it. You can't solicit. Now, you can be in a dedicated forum for an investor for an investment. Like if we were submit our project to the LAO and for some reason they decided to make it public, like that's okay. I mean, that's not soliciting. That's something else. So these are these regulatory aspects that many startups don't recognize because they don't know. They're not exposed to it.
Yeah.
But
these are all good baby steps, man. Like just our space, the crypto space is starting to mature, what I mean, before our eyes.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be a lot of resistance for that. We see it even in Decentraland. There's like people who are against like Vegas City, like trying to do the proper thing.
Let's talk about that. So we had a conversation on our Discord about the idea of sort of like kind of we talked about in the past with the conference rooms, how like a Decentraland conference looks exactly like a real world conference, and there's nothing wrong with that. My point for that was that I feel like in a virtual world, a conference should look and feel different. Like
just something out of this world.
Yeah, something where the experience of a conference is showing up, looking at all the booths, talking to all the people. So you got to take the functionality or the value proposition of the conference and take that value proposition and apply it to a virtual world where you don't necessarily have to have a group of people all at the same time, just because this is a worldwide conference, right? Some people are sleeping right now, and other people are eating lunch right now, right? And so what would a conference where anyone at any time can have access to get that same value proposition, what would that look like? And in my eyes, it's just not a room with a bunch of pictures. Like, it's different, something else.
Yeah.
And so
almost like you don't like the idea of, I saw something floating around in Twitter of like literally a recent conference that our boy Sebastian of the Sandbox was.
Exactly.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Literally him on stage in front of a podium.
Yeah, this must be a dedicated application where you are an avatar and you're in a conference room and you can click to sit down on a seat.
Exactly.
And you go and you look up and you see a slideshow or a video or someone like standing at the podium, like. There's
like that sounds cool for like educational type environments. You know what I mean? I would expect something like that in Decentraland University.
Yeah, it's just there's got to be a virtual way of doing this, like a metaverse way.
Kind of like that. Did you see that Travis Scott concert in Fortnite?
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, that shit was fucking lit.
Yeah.
Like something like that, where like there's an event happening, right, with the whole monster Travis Scott in the middle of the world, and everyone else is like,
see,
all over the fucking place.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. We should. Oh, well, we can't find a video because we need the music and it's copyrighted, so we can't do that. But that whole concert can happen in Decentraland. The problem is it takes a whole lot of code and a whole lot of development to make that work. Meaning you have to control the avatars for a moment at time. They all have to like fist bump. Like the developer has to control the avatar to really like dictate the experience. Yeah. And that's what they did in Fortnite.
That Fortnite event really opened my eyes to like a lot of things that are missing as far as from Decentraland. Like especially with the avatars.
You've seen the marshmallow one, right?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
I have. And I went back and revisited it because of this. Like, I just, dude, it's fascinating. Like, there's people out there comparing Fortnite now to like the actualization of the metaverse because they're hosting these like big social events that are global and all this shit.
It's definitely not.
It's not. It's not. It's just like a really good marketing scheme.
Yeah.
But it feels kind of like metaverse-y, meaning like there's potential there. Yeah, like this should be like a normal thing, a normal community. I don't know.
I guess it goes back down to what a metaverse is, the definition, because you could go into Counter-Strike and you and I can go in there and we can decide not to shoot at each other, but we're having a conversation, and I mean that's it. That's all you can do.
Yeah, that's not the metaverse.
And then we can shoot at each other, but that's about it.
It's not like an actual Second Life existence.
Yeah,
what I'm saying. Like, so the fact that they're making those comparisons and stuff is just. I don't know. It's an obvious like.
I think the whole mass volume of community, they're not aware of blockchain and like the ownership of digital assets, and so they're just not recognizing that there's something better, right? Even though like from a technical standpoint, Decentraland doesn't hold a candle to Fortnite from like the playability, the gameplay standpoint, but Fortnite doesn't hold a candle to Decentraland in digital ownership. That's the beauty of it all. Like dissecting these parallels is like, it doesn't matter how much money. What's the company? Epic Games, or whatever, that owns Fortnite. It doesn't matter how much money they have, how many subscribers they have. They'll never truly fulfill like the foundational elements necessary for like a true metaverse. Meaning like there's no potential for them to have a decentralized economy or a democratic system of creation. Things. That's right.
Like, it's just it can't happen. So
it's
like us is like, I feel like we're the true like metaverse pioneers. Like we always have that at our disposal. Meaning like we're starting off with that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's what
it's like. One good example is like Frankie's been doing these live interviews in Decentraland, and you go to this parcel and it's packed. There's a bunch of people there just listening.
Yeah, it was like 30 people yesterday or something.
Yeah, they just stand there and they listen. And that's what we're talking about. That is a metaverse interaction, right? It's not. That's why the metaverse was created, for those things that you can't really predict. Like we had talked about doing a live podcast on Decentraland.
Oh yeah, that was like one of our original things. You know,
I mean, that's why we put a bunch of podcast images on the top of the tower,
top
because
floor.
that's where we're going to host our podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And now that the functionality is there, I mean, that's one activity that we need to like be consistent on for sure.
Oh yeah, Oscar's already working on the video meta.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So hopefully he'll have it ready by the time this capability comes out. So yeah, I want to have like a big watch party like on top of her tower.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what the fuck we're all gonna watch. Maybe we'll all just like sit around and circle jerk. I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be amazing. To me, like that's gonna like pull it not all together, but that's gonna make so much glue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? With the audio and the video, and now we got like this interactive map that's coming out. Like we're so close, man, to like actually like getting the ball rolling. You know what I mean? And then we got like these DCO core guys on the side facilitating a lot of community events too. Like I feel good. I feel positive.
Yeah, I totally agree. We just unfortunately to build something like MetaZone, it's expensive, right? And it requires more help than we currently have. And so that's something like we need to figure that out.
Yeah, there are key things missing that are make or break like our whole vision of our platform that currently we're probably capable of delivering it. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah.
And like an easier solution would be to like pay somebody who already is equipped with these skills and just like knock it out. And by like next week, we're done.
Yeah.
That's an ideal. Yeah. Next week we'll be ready to launch these NFTs and shit. But, life's not that awesome. But hopefully with the LAO it is. You know what I mean? That's
why it's so exciting. Like
me too, man. There's potential there. I see light at the tunnel.
And the most important thing about the LAO is that there's legalities like baked into it, right? As long as you follow their system and their protocol, like you don't have a whole lot to worry from a legal standpoint. Because that's, to me, like I like coming up with ideas. I like implementing those ideas. I like managing those ideas. But from a legal standpoint, I have very little understanding as to what I can and cannot do. And the little that I know is from experience. And there is no clear way to understand like all these like regulatory aspects when raising money, right? You have to go and read like sec.gov, and it's not easy to digest, right? I don't know if you've ever read one of those documents. It's just not. I don't have the legalese language in my brain to really comprehend a lot of this stuff simply, right?
Yeah.
And so I like that the LAO has that built-in functionality, the legal functionality of it, because, that's not one of the things I like to think about. That's not...
Agreed. Yeah, they're really trying to... they're kind of like on the same wavelength as us. They're creating tools to facilitate creation, what I mean?
Exactly.
To make creation easier. Like that, we all have the same goal. Like we just want this creation to we want a Cambrian moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where there's just so much coming out.
And on top of that, like they have a concept called rage quit. So as I understand it, that as when you make the investment and you decide to pull out, you can pull out what hasn't been invested from your funds, and then I think you still maintain the equity in whatever you invested in. So like, let's say you put in $100K and $50K of it was invested in a bunch of projects, because the 100 members decided to invest in those projects. You can decide to rage quit. You take your remaining funds out, and I believe you maintain that ownership.
Yeah, but you lose your spot in the DAO, basically.
That's right.
And then someone else, probably on like a wait list, like they're in, and you're out. So good luck getting back in, but at least you still get something, or you lose it all if it all just turns to dust.
See, that poses a good question. Let's say you're a whale. You're a whale investor, right? You're Peter Thiel, and looks at the LAO and say, "I'll put in $100 million," right? Which is way more than what they're raising, right? Mm-hmm. Why shouldn't he have be a member? Why shouldn't he be a member with that amount of money? Like, who do you kick out at that point? So those would be like interesting conversations, or interesting to see what happens in that situation. But so far, I mean, I like everything that they're doing. I want to.
I agree.
I want to make sure that.
Yeah, we need to, like instinctually you want to be like, let's introduce them to the Decentraland team, and like let's build a relationship like with amongst the community, Decentraland team, and these people, because there's a potential bridge there for the future that we could all benefit from,
Yeah.
So that might be our role. Who knows? Maybe we'll tell the team like about this, and then they'll be like, you know what? Like that doesn't involve us. It involves you.
Yeah.
You are the community. Like it's up to you guys whether or not you want to do. It's like we don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean? That's probably the right answer, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, that's I proposed this to the Decentraland team. I was like, hey, take a look at the LAO. I mean, you should like consider this. And their response was like, yeah, if the community wants to implement the LAO,
exactly,
you implement it, right? It's that simple. And
I was like, it's almost like, what's the point? Like being like, hey team, look what we found. Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
It's almost like, hey, Decentraland community, look what we found.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So it's at least an option in the different options that we're talking about implementing.
Yeah, like the community needs a Notion board of its own.
Let's say it should be as simple as, all right, the question is, should DAO funds be replenishable? And if the answer is yes, okay. Then if it's yes, how do you replenish those funds? It's like, what are the mechanisms to replenish? And one of them is an ROI. It's like usually that's done by investing and expecting a return on investment, right? And so, okay, so if that's a yes, then we have the LAO as a mechanism to facilitate that, right, legally.
Yeah. It's almost like, you throw out surveys to the community, like
and if it's not
like
that,
gauge.
See, the other option is, okay, so we have grant money, we just grant that money to projects that have cool ideas, and that's it. And as soon as the funds dry up, then Decentraland is really, it's up to like the people.
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to get any help other than like going for traditional investment.
Hopefully whatever we spent those funds on was enough to kind of like
be sustainable, right? To
hit critical mass, or whatever the fuck.
Sustain gameplay, sustain daily active users, all that stuff.
Yeah, in order basically like that the economy has to be like fully functioning and healthy, and
Yeah.
We'll see. But this is pretty cool, man. It's good talk.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else to say on
No,
that
was it. I mean, I wanted to end it there. And so hopefully you enjoyed this interview with Pri Desai from OpenLaw and the LAO. I'll put her links, the LAO links, her Twitter handle, everything in the description. Make sure you follow us at The Block Runner, and we will see you next week.
Yep, and stay tuned for these roundtables too, because they're gonna keep coming.
Yeah. So they're gonna be coming every single weekend. So we appreciate you, and until next week.
All right, we're out. See you later.
Peace.